The first key, the key of clarity. Be aware of what anxiety is and what it is not. Starts out with two quotes. The wise man asked, "How shall we escape the heat of the scorching flames?" He answered, "Go right into the middle of the fire." It's a Chinese aphorism. And then, to be happy is to become aware of oneself without fright. Walter Benjamin. And I'll add a little one here too. From Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, restoreth my soul, leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's not in the book, I just felt like it needed to be put there. The first key to calm. If you spend time with anyone in the 5-year-old and under crowd, you may be intimately familiar with the Disney film Bambi, because little ones continually recruit grown-ups to sit down with them during the scary parts. But if this ubiquitous video is not in your library or currently logged into your short-term memory, allow me to describe a brief scene that illustrates a very useful lesson about anxiety. A hunter enters the forest, brandishing his rifle, and all of the animals race for cover. 3 quails hide in the underbrush. The first quail repeatedly cries out in alarm as the hunter approaches. Her 2 friends warn her to be quiet. Be calm, they whisper. Don't get excited. But the first quail in a panic suggests that everyone fly. Her friends counter, whatever you do, don't fly. But unable to tolerate another moment of such excruciating apprehension, the first quail propels herself upwards. The inevitable kablam of gunfire follows. We know someone will be roasting a quail for supper tonight. What happened here? Why did the 2 friends survive while another ended up an entree? The lesson to be learned in a nutshell, it's not anxiety per se that causes problems, but rather what one does with it. Learn to view anxiety with some objectivity, and you can save yourself all manner of grief. Act rashly in hopes of getting rid of the feeling as quickly as possible, and as often as not, kablam. The scary part. All creatures experience anxiety. All creatures experience anxiety. The quail, the whale, the hen, the fox, and of course the human being. It is part of the survival repertoire of every man and beast. Anxiety is brought into being by an expectation of possible danger and acts as a triggering mechanism, instigating hormonal and muscular responses that promote a state of alertness and a readiness to flee or to defend oneself if such behavior is required. In many cases, anxiety, whether instinctive or learned, is an appropriate response to a given set of circumstances. Should a cat come sniffing around a mouse hole, no one would call the mouse's emergent wariness a neurotic trait. and only a fool would suggest that the restless rodent needed a healthy dose of positive thinking to counter its agitated mood. Likewise, no one would fault a farmer whose anxiety compelled him to hurriedly ready his storm cellar when the weather forecast included tornadoes. Nor would one try to tempt him with a tranquilizer to take his mind off his troubles. Anxiety in this form, grounded in reality and focused on a tangible and imminent threat, should be afforded the healthy respect it deserves. But anxiety, for all its evolutionary usefulness, can be problematical. For one thing, even when it is entirely appropriate to experience anxiety, one can overreact to it. Men or beasts who overreact and panic in the face of anxiety can hardly be expected to choose the wisest course of action. They might well expose themselves to unnecessary danger either by selecting a course of action too impulsively or by becoming completely incapacitated, too overwhelmed by the feeling of anxiety to function. For another thing, anxiety can sometimes manifest itself into inappropriate or extraneous ways, instigating a rehearsal for danger when in fact actual danger is not in the offing. This latter problem is endemic in our species. In humankind, anxiety can take many insidious forms. It can also present abundant opportunities for reacting to it in a self-defeating manner. As you will see, clarity is the antidote for such self-defeat. Junk mail from the mind. Like any other creature, of course, we humans sometimes experience specific, appropriate anxiety that warns us of a genuine, prospective peril. We hear a smoke alarm go off, or see a toddler venture too close to a beehive, and we gear up for urgent action. But let's be honest, we also tend to conjure up ingenious variations of this presumption of peril theme. For we humans tend to define peril broadly, that is, as anything that threatens to disrupt circumstances with which we have grown comfortable, and that even threatens to disrupt a vision of the future as we would like it to unfold. For example, have you ever felt anxious about certain events occurring even though you had no objective information whatsoever that they would occur at all? As in, I'm taking a vacation to Mexico in 2 weeks. I hope my plane doesn't crash. I hope it doesn't rain once I get there. I hope I don't come down with Montezuma's revenge. Have you ever dreaded performing your usual chore because something unusual, and by your definition of unusual, awful, might happen? As in, I have to get my car inspected. What if it takes forever and I'm too late to pick up the kids? What if that odd little clunk in the engine turns out to be some huge problem? What if I need a whole new transmission? How much is all this going to cost me? Have you ever felt you are mentally twisting yourself into a pretzel, desperately trying to will a particular situation, say a job interview or a medical exam, to turn out in a very particular way? Or more impossible yet, trying to will everything in a current situation to stay exactly the way it is forevermore? And have you ever felt certain Have you ever felt that certain something bad was going to happen? You just weren't quite sure what. If you've answered affirmatively, it's not because you're crazy or stupid. In fact, it's because you're so smart, your human brain is capable of higher functions of imagining, fantasizing, calculating, and procrastinating. It is capable of contemplating not only the immediate future, but long-term probabilities and possibilities. Certainly, the human brain is a wondrous, awe-inspiring thing, with many laudable accomplishments to its credit. Mathematics, music, chemistry, astronomy, etc. But when it comes to anxiety, the forever forward-thinking human brain is wont to run amok. For along with the imperative anxiety provoking communication, it sends us smoke alarm beeping, check it out. Bees buzzing around your kids, take note. It also sends us a massive amount of junk mail. Junk mail from the mind is unlike the junk mail in your mailbox. It is full of messages that activate a continual stream of wishes and fears. The junk mail in your mailbox may tell you life would be more complete if you only took a cruise to the Bahamas, joined a health club, or purchased, say, a goose down comforter, a new set of power tools, or a thigh and buttock toner. It might also urge you to consider a new credit card with which to purchase this assortment, and perhaps a credit card protection policy in case someone attempts to obtain these goodies for himself at your expense. Now, this may all seem like so much superfluous stuff and nonsense, which indeed it is, but consider for a moment how often one's mind hums similar refrains. Got to get some more of this, croons the mind. You can never have too much of that. And now that you've got it, you better make sure you keep it. What would you do if you lost it? This continual craving for ways to alter the course of our life, ostensibly for the better, and desire to exert control, especially over what is uncontrollable, makes us endlessly anxious. Yet the mind could be so ingenious as so relentless that we grow completely habituated to its assiduous, insatiable desires, imagining that the anxious life they bid us to lead is the only life there is. And so we become junk mail junkies, but we need not be. A new approach. As diverted as you may be by the junk mail in your mailbox, you would hardly consider taking action on every piece of it that comes your way. For the most part, you probably sort through it quickly, perhaps getting a good chuckle out of some of it. Then you put aside what's not really relevant to your circumstances or need. Very likely most of it, if not all of it. Yet we often feel compelled to react strongly to the mind's little missives. Because, hey, after all, it's our magnificent mind talking, right? Our constant companion, our ever-vigilant arbiter of reality. So we must need to do something when the mind serves up an anxious thought. But what should we do? Imagine, for example, rolling around in bed trying to get to sleep when the mind decides to send out a message that says, more or less, ahem. Remember that article you read in the paper yesterday that said the IRS is planning more tax audits this year? Were you really entitled to all those deductions? Or yo there, trying to get to sleep, are you? Well, have you taken some time today to think about whether or not you're really going to have enough money for retirement? Or notice those extra hairs on your hairbrush tonight? Doesn't baldness run in your family? Now, we can hardly indulge in a quintessential fight or flight response in reaction to such thoughts. There's nowhere to run and there's no one to fight with. But we don't care much for being stuck with the way the thoughts make us feel. We experience the feelings as burdensome, irritating, and altogether unpleasant. We want to obliterate them at any cost, so we want to take action. So maybe we do attempt to fight with ourselves. We try to dispute all the scary scenarios our mind has conjured up, though the resourceful mind just comes up with new, scarier ones. And maybe we do try to run, jumping out of bed to down a Xanax or Valium to try and make our feelings go away. Though now we'll be anxious about when to take our next pill, and anxious that the doctor may not renew our prescription since we're taking them a little more often than recommended. Or maybe we just stew and mull, fret and worry, until the worry becomes an end in itself. Or maybe we store the anxiety in our bodies, generating everything from heartburn to headaches to far more serious conditions. Now, let me suggest an alternative, one that you may have never considered. What if instead of taking these kinds of habitual actions in response to anxiety, we were able to just look at our anxiety dispassionately and sort through it with a detached, objective eye before deciding what action to take, if any at all? That is where the key of clarity comes in. Understanding the key of clarity. The key of clarity is about developing a discriminating awareness where anxiety is concerned. It states, be aware of what anxiety is and what it is not. So what is anxiety? It is a message from the mind that warns us that danger lurks, and a feeling of wanting to respond to that message. What is anxiety not? It is not our master, but our servant. So long as we refuse to give it absolute power over us, it can help rather than harm us. When we empower anxiety, we rush frantically to answer its call and quell its siren song. Even when the danger is a very tangible one, the consequences of such undiscerning haste are often negative. They can range from the embarrassing, imagine calling for the fire department when your beeping smoke alarm is signaling nothing more than a low battery, to the injurious, imagine waving your arms about excitedly to fend off a bee and thus bringing about the very sting you dread. To the terminal, remember the quail who felt she had to fly rather than wait out the hunter in silence? When the mind's red alert is heeded, and the peril we dread is in fact only an imagined one, equally disastrous consequences can ensue. We hardly need to be further convinced of the ill effects of stress on health. Many believe that chronic anxiety can quite literally affect the length of our lives. And it undeniably affects the day-to-day quality of our lives. In a sorry paradox, our mind continually jabbering about potential threats to our equanimity makes the very equanimity impossible to achieve. It separates us from the good life we say we want to live. Remember, however, the mind is persistently yakety-yakking. One might say that is its job. Like a talk show host bucking for ratings, it is deeply determined to make a big deal out of something, even if that something turns out to be nothing much in the end. Trying to prevent the mind from manufacturing anxious thoughts is futile. Nabisco would have sooner stopped manufacturing saltines. But prevention of thought isn't necessary or desirable. What's needed is an ability to pause, however briefly, when the thought first registers and evaluate the stimulus that engendered it in the first place. With even a millisecond of rational evaluation, we can detach from our anxiety and assess whether or not a danger is real. If it is, we will know, in our objectivity, how best to act. If it isn't real, we can discard the anxious thought like a piece of unwanted junk mail. To pause is everything, for in the gap of detached scrutiny that the pause creates, anxiety finally loosens its grip on us. In that gap lies the serenity and tranquility we find so elusive. But just how does one pause? To borrow an old vaudeville line, it's the same way one gets to Carnegie Hall. Practice, practice, practice. The key of clarity in action. Anxiety, you'll recall, always entails a warning. And a warning, by definition, is an anticipation of something that might happen. So anxiety is about what might happen as opposed to what is happening. When we are slaves to anxiety, we're constantly living in the realm of might, which is to say in the future. To end this enslavement, we must actively practice living in the land of is, which is to say in the moment. Now you may protest, but I already live in the moment. Do you? In a well-known Zen tale, a disciple asks a master what he understands to be the secret of life. The master replies, "When I eat, I eat. When I sleep, I sleep." How many of us can say the same? When we eat, we think about what we're going to eat next and calculate how many fat grams we're consuming and worry about how we're going to look in a bathing suit, and think of dozens of other scenarios that have nothing at all to do with the food in front of us or the experience of eating it. When we sleep, we toss and turn and wake with a start at 4 a.m., realizing that even in sleep we've been pondering the potential dangers and difficulties in our lives. When we're at work, we think of being home. And when we're at home, we think of being at work. We're simply never where we are. This mindset, however, could be gradually altered. To reconnect to the moment and diffuse anxiety's power over us, we can begin by choosing to deliberately focus on one thing, and only one thing, that is happening now. For 10 minutes every day, try undertaking a single activity and concentrating fully on it. For example, when you eat. Commit a fraction of each day to, say, eating a bowl of soup with full attentiveness. Don't talk while you eat, and don't read or watch TV. Don't worry about how much sodium is in the soup. Don't wish for a new bowl to eat it in. Don't judge the soup or rate it. Just taste it. Smell it. Experience its texture and temperature. If I should say, when your mind wanders, gently bring it back to the activity at hand. You can apply this attentiveness practice to virtually anything. Take a bath with attentiveness, peel potatoes, scrub some pots, or just place a flower on your desk, and from time to time look at it with attentiveness. Become as resourceful in finding things to pay attention to in the moment as you are finding things to obsess on, which may or may not happen in the future. And if you need a personal instructor, just observe a very young child devoting attention to any commonplace activity or object. For very young children are naturally awestruck by whatever is engaging them. Bringing attentiveness to commonplace experiences create an opportunity for the mind to settle down and achieve clarity. But I warn you, this seemingly simple practice also creates powerful challenges and can be highly frustrating at first, because among the things you will see clearly, probably for the first time, is how frantically your mind tries to flee from the present moment, often using anxiety as its chief means of transportation. It is inevitable that the anxious thoughts will interject themselves into your attentiveness practice, but it can be emphasized strongly that this does not mean you are doing anything wrong, or on the contrary. On the contrary, roll out the welcome mat for those anxious thoughts by showing up right now. They are providing you at long last with a means of managing them. Who's the boss? So when you're minding your own business, attempting to polish the silver or repot a plant attentively, and your mind sends you nagging, anxious little missives, don't try to banish them. It's like telling yourself not to think of purple porpoises. Inevitably, purple porpoises will soon be all you're thinking about. Don't struggle against the thoughts either, for like an insect caught in a Venus flytrap, the more you struggle, the more tightly you are encased. Don't try to replace a thought with its opposite. Remember Ralph Cramden, the volatile honeymooner's character who tried to convince himself he was not upset by insisting through clenched teeth and locked jaw, pins and needles, needles and pins. A happy man is a man who grins. He was not fooling anyone, of course, least of all himself, and neither will you. Above all, try not to get all involved with the thought and cling to them, as is our entrenched habit, for dear life. Without judgment and without labeling the thoughts, good or bad, just notice them. Watch their fleeting nature. Bear them in mind momentarily, acknowledge them, and then bring your attention back to your chosen focused activity. Now, your anxious thoughts are not used to being treated in this fashion. They will likely revisit you in a short order, tugging at your sleeve of your consciousness, whining, "Hey, didn't you hear what I said?" You may give them a mental smile and nod, perhaps beginning to see traces of humor in their mischievous persistence. But in once again turning your attention to the now, you are in effect reminding your anxious thoughts that even though they may keep coming back, they cannot stick around. Now you are actually beginning to show who's in charge around here. And lo and behold, it's not your thoughts after all. It's something larger, pure, and far more enduring. It's awareness with a capital A. It's as if thoughts are the many brush strokes that make up a painting. Beneath and behind the brush strokes and the picture they comprise, however, is a canvas. The canvas holds or houses the painting, but the canvas itself doesn't alter because of what's imposed on its surface. Fundamentally, it is immutable. If you could peer beneath the overlay of paint or gently wash it away with solvent, you would see in its pure state clear and spacious. Simply to realize that the canvas underlies the painting at all times is to take the first step towards liberation from anxiety's tyranny. Power of awareness. Henry Miller wrote, "The aim of life is to live, and to live means to be aware, joyously, drunkenly, serenely, divinely aware." Virtually everyone who studies the workings of the mind, from experimental psychologists to psychoanalysts to spiritual philosophers, is convinced of the beneficial effects of cultivating awareness. Psychologists will attest that if we process an emotion through the brain's neocortex, which is the psychological description of the awareness process, the odds of handling it appropriately vastly improve. Psychoanalysts will point out that the trademark of the mentally fit is the ability to let the impulse arise and pass away, briefly holding it in awareness without acting on it imprudently. Buddhists will tell you that generating the sort of awareness that comes from focused attention is the first step towards attaining nirvana, the state of bliss brought about by the absence of continual longing and desires. These are all different ways of conceptualizing the same truth. namely that awareness ultimately can break any destructive emotional cycle. None of this goes to disparage emotions and emotional thoughts themselves, which give life so much of its rich textures. It is only to say that we ought to conceptualize them differently. We should honor them, but we must not blindly worship them to the exclusion of all else. And to truly honor thoughts and feelings, we need to look at them without prejudice or preconceptions. Think of the manifestations of your hustling, bustling, ever chattering or chatting mind as a part of your sensory array. You don't believe, nor do you instantly react to everything you see or hear, at least not without further investigation. And though at first it may seem strange to contemplate, you can't believe everything you think either. Of two minds. In a way, it is as if each of us has two minds. There is, of course, the perennially busy mind, doing its valuable workaday chores, but also continually fussing like a mother duck over her ducklings. But then there's the calm mind, stable and steadfast, unflappable. It is, as the Indian teacher and philosopher Krishnamurti so eloquently put it, quote, a mind that is not distracted by its own thought, unquote. The busy mind is to brushstroke as the calm mind is to the canvas beneath them. Become acquainted with the calm mind, which you already possess, whoever you are. For even a few minutes at a time, and cumulative benefits will rapidly reveal themselves. Your inappropriate anxiety will lose their hold on you as you begin to see that reacting to them is merely a habit that can be broken. Even when faced with a genuine cause for anxiety, you will be able to conduct yourself all the more wisely for having learned that you can create some vital distance between yourself and any given situation. Now, instead of panicking, you will be an eye of calm in the storm of anxiety. Instead of overanalyzing a problem and tearing it apart only to grow increasingly frustrated, you will find that solutions will begin to present themselves to you more quickly and intuitively. In the bargain, you will begin to lighten up, take yourself less seriously, and laugh at many more things that you ever did before, especially yourself. In fact, when the chicken littles of anxiety come clucking at all hours, insisting that the sky is falling, you may find yourself responding with a knowing grin instead of running for cover. Who says so? In the initial weeks, the going may be slow. Replacing an ingrained habit with a new one always involves the proverbial 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. But undertaking attentiveness practice for a little while each day is actually the fastest route to removing the obstacles that stand between you and your natural calm mind. I know you'd like me to prove it, and in fact, I could tell you that for over 5 millennia, saints and mystics and shamans, all of them innate psychologists of every tradition, have conducted what are, for all intents and purposes, experiments verifying the dramatic effects that practicing now focused attention can have on the day-to-day disposition. Though they may call the source of peacefulness and equanimity their access by different names, a Buddhist may say the Buddha nature, a Christian the Holy Spirit, a Sufi the hidden essence, a Hindu the Atman, and so forth. Their insight all attests to its universality. The naturally calm mind is no less a part of any one of us than it is of them. They've just put the same time and effort into looking for it. But I won't belabor this issue, because the real point here is that finally, no one can really prove any of this to you but yourself. Do your own experiment. Try a few minutes of attentiveness to a soul activity each day for, say, 3 weeks. Then stop for a week. Stopping will be a cakewalk, because the tug of old habits and the busy mind that enforces them will have been nagging you to stop this foolishness anyway. Now observe yourself at the end of your week off and notice the difference in the way you conduct yourself. How does your stress level differ? How much time are you spending ruminating about things you cannot change? How are you reacting to the face of life's ups and downs? How do you feel about yourself? And how are you treating other people? The answer should speak for themselves, but if they are not resounding clear, then ask those people who are close to you if they have noticed any changes. You may be surprised how differently others perceive you depending on whether or not you are accessing your calm mind. This, by the way, brings us to the second key of calm, which focuses on our dealings with one another. Because unlike monks and mystics who may nourish their calm mind in the privacy of a monastery or a sacred cave, you will be cultivating yours in the real world. Real is a relative term, of course, but what I mean is the world of spouses, children, in-laws, bosses, and subordinates, friends, and neighbors. Ours is the world of people who neglect to turn off their car alarms, who bring 18 items to the express lane of the supermarket, and who make telemarketing phone calls to you just as you are sitting down to dinner. If you sometimes feel all of them seem to exist to make your life more complicated and to goad you into losing your calm mind rather than using it, please read on.